love goes on, softly on. So don't be sighing or crying. Still live with our
Welcome to another podcast from Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I'm Scott R. Kaufman. This is Stephen Attewell. And today we will be talking about You Win or You Die, which is the 7th episode, I believe.
7th, yep.
Yes, 7th episode of the first season of Game of Thrones. And I think the best way to start talking about this episode is to actually just start talking about the beginning of the episode, which has... Do you want to kick it off, or?
Sure. I mean, we start with an invented scene, and in an episode that's very heavy with invented scenes, actually. But an example of how to do it absolutely brilliantly, which is the introduction of Lord Tywin skinning a deer, and it's very different. It is a different portrayal from the book, but really Charles Dance has kind of made it his own. So I have a hard time imagining Lord Tywin as anyone else than Charles Dance at this point. And it's a great scene because, you've written some really good stuff about this scene, but what I really liked about it was you get a very clear sense of the ideology and thinking of two different men. That, Tywin and Jaime don't particularly understand each other very well. And you get a real sense of the family dynamics. And it's interesting that, they both agree that what happened with Ned was stupid, but for very different reasons.
Yes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that what happened with Ned was in fact very stupid. But they're sort of at odds as to... I think this is one of the first moments where we're sensing a real what from a Lannister point of view would be a weakness in Jaime.
Yes.
And just to sort of talk about what I've heard about really, really quickly, this is a brilliantly directed scene where we're seeing, Tywin take apart a stag, which seems sort of significant. This is our introduction to him in an episode where something very similar will happen, but also it really marks the moment where Jaime, who to this point has almost been a sort of cartoon villain.
Yeah, he's been the bad guy in Shrek.
Yeah,
I mean, down to the hair.
Exactly, and there's a sense that there could be something more to him that we're not really going to see return until probably season 3.
Yeah.
And so it is really, I think, but it also it sort of gives us a little insight into what's wrong with the Lannisters, right? Not just this is how they work, but this is why they're fucked. I mean, this is
the deep family dysfunction.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I remember listening to another podcast, I can't remember which one, but at the time they talked about that Tywin is like the kryptonite for all the other Lannisters. That normally, Jaime, Tyrion, they're very kind of intelligent, snarky people who are capable of dominating a conversation. And even Cersei, who's really at her sort of peak of power in this episode. All of them collapse down to children the moment they're in the same room with Tywin. That they just can't get past that family dynamic.
No, and they take the directors in later seasons take advantage of this by putting them all in the same room at the dinner table, and it's like This is what Thanksgiving was like at the Lannister house, and it was.
Yeah, it's like the worst WASP family you can think of, except they've all got military power, which makes it even worse.
Exactly. Do you want to keep on going with the scene, or do you want to move on?
I just want to mention one last thing, which is to sort of point out this thing about feudal logic, that Tywin doesn't care what people think about him as they fear him. And the idea that, a family is only as powerful as people think it is baked into the world around it. And it's a sense of Tywin understands this world. And, when people are trying to understand what happens with the War of Five Kings that is just starting, I think one of the things that they sometimes get wrong, and this was part of my beef with Spencer Ackerman, is that they interpret it as a modern military conflict. And it's not. It's a feudal military conflict. And in a feudal military conflict, your generals can disobey you or go home if they don't know what you're doing. So it is both a military and a political conflict within the army in a way that we haven't really seen in recent history for, over a century.
And I mean, the one thing I'll say in Spencer's defense, he is a Pentagon reporter, so the world he is very much this one, so he's reading it in those terms. But the other thing that we see as being really crucial in terms of how your reputation actually demands respect or commands respect or doesn't is just the fact that communication is slower. I mean, you can be Robb Stark and have never lost a battle, have this wonderful reputation. I mean, what are people going to think 4 months after the Red Wedding when news of it finally arrives? Like, what the fuck? I mean, he was just winning. Yeah. Last we heard, he was just, But and they can still bank in part on the Stark reputation until news of that arrives, and then they talk about the importance of it. So I sort of agree with you. I think viewing this in sort of modern military terms it's not that it's anachronistic. I think it's just sort of wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't really capture the political dynamic that explains what's actually going on.
And what's interesting is to sort of segue to the back to Winterfell is this is exactly what Theon is trying to do. Right? He's like, I'm from the Iron Islands. If you, when he's talking to Osha, if you would, if you should respect me because of
he's trying to assert feudal hierarchy, and Osha from the outside is kind of.
She has no idea.
It's not just that. It's that she's finding the kind of weak points in his logic. That there's a difference between being a king and the son of a king. And especially if you are a ward and a hostage, which are inherently feudal relationships.
Exactly.
This idea that you send your children to another family is something to raise them, is something we don't do. Likewise, the idea that you can actually prevent military conflicts by grabbing a member of the family of the other side and keeping them with you is weird. So I liked that scene. I thought, it was a little bit clumsy and exposition heavy, but in terms of getting across where Theon's eventual grievances are coming from, we did need to sort of see that at a certain level, his status is not what he thinks it should be. That he's highborn, but he's outranked by a maester, which normally wouldn't happen.
I mean, and it's a weird position for him because on the one hand, you actually have to be important enough to be taken hostage, right? And so he feels the privilege.
Small folk don't get taken prisoner.
Exactly. So he feels that privilege, and at the same time, when he's confronting Osha, she has been taken prisoner, and I think his attempt to assert dominance over her is sort of, like a prison yard squabble. I'm the most important prisoner here, right? I need you to know that.
It's like, new inmate coming into the prison, and the guy who was previously on the bottom now tries to move one up in the hierarchy.
Exactly.
So should we talk about the scene with Eddard and Cersei?
Yes.
So I like this scene. I thought it was well acted. I will say, however, that having just reread this chapter, it's jarring the difference between book and the show. For example, in the book, there's this great exchange where the moment that Eddard accuses Cersei of sleeping with her brother, that she slaps him in the face, and he says, well, I'll wear this as a badge of honor. And Eddard doesn't get too many jokes in the series, so I was a little disappointed he doesn't get that joke. It's also different in that in the book, she offers to sleep with him. And pulling that out makes her seem so much more secure and powerful than she is in reality. At that moment, she doesn't have a monopoly on force. The Gold Cloaks have not gone either way. So she is, at this moment, and this is where I think people get, this is pointed to as like the stupidest thing that Ned ever does. But I don't think they quite get that at this moment, they're kind of on equal terms. Eddard has, some men, she's got some men, and he knows this thing that's incredibly dangerous about her. And if anything that happens following from this doesn't go exactly to plan, then she's doomed. And that's kind of why I argue in a piece that will link to this, that Cersei is also acting stupid at this moment. That she has no reason to confirm any of this. And she doesn't have a monopoly on force that would allow her to get away with just straight up confirming that she committed adultery and therefore treason. So it's not just a case that Eddard's an idiot. It's that he's doing something unwise, but so is his opponent.
And I think removing that also makes her seem less desperate because we've seen her attempt to use her sexuality to manipulate people but if she had actually done that with him, it would have shown, one, that she doesn't really understand who Ned Stark is. Just because he has a bastard son doesn't mean, right, those were different circumstances, whatever they were. But also, it's just, I don't think they want to make her look that desperate that early. Right?
Yeah, and it's also, you can see that this is a long-term...
It's going to undermine Joffrey's moment, right? Joffrey's decision to finish Ned comes as a surprise because he has been under his mother's thumb and she has been in control of everything. If we see her desperate this early, a lot of the sort of dramatic tension of that is going to be undercut. It's like, oh, it's just another, man telling her no.
I guess the interesting thing from my perspective is that it points to a decision that they've clearly made to make Cersei less crazy up front. I mean, because in the chapter, she talks about, deliberately eating Robert's semen so that he'll never have a child by her. Which is a level of, that's slightly unhinged even for somebody who, is in an abusive relationship and doesn't want to have the child abuser. There's a slightly sort of Freudian... So it's just, and I guess what I'm curious about is going forward into Season 4 is how they're going to make the transition once Cersei becomes more a dominant figure within King's Landing. Okay, I think that's not spoilery.
Yeah, no, I was about to say, I think that's spoiler free.
So should we talk about the worst scene of Season 1 and possibly of the series?
Okay, go for it.
So the scene with Littlefinger and Roz in the brothel.
Yeah.
Honestly, and that's the thing is, in the same episode in which we have this invented scene with Tywin, where it shows that they can really do, go behind the scenes and show us stuff that we've never seen, but that must have happened at some point during the show.
Yeah.
They give us the scene that is really ham-fisted, in terms of, Littlefinger, straight up monologuing like a villain in Crisis, and explaining his motivation directly to the cameras.
Well, I think it's part of that HBO ethos I mean, it could be something from Deadwood, right? The sort of monologuing. I think it might also just be really annoying to people who are familiar with the show, have read the book, because it seems unnecessary. I mean, just it's flat out. Either we already inferred this, or we should have.
Well, and also by the end of the episode, Littlefinger is going to have a knife under Ned's throat.
Yeah.
We don't need this telegraphing. It would work much better as a shocker moment if we never see that scene and we think that Littlefinger is sort of a scheming bastard, but that we don't see it that telegraphed. What he's going to do.
I agree. Part of me wonders whether that might have not been a directive that came from higher up. There's a great new Twitter account that takes production notes as given by studio executives to showrunner.
Oh, that'd be interesting to read.
I will try to find that link again, but it's quite clear that oftentimes some of the worst of what ends up in television, especially when it's expository like that, is because someone higher up said, I don't know what's going on. What the hell's going on here? You need to, right? It's sort of like someone whose idea of narrative theory stopped with the Chekhovian notion that if you put a gun on the wall in Act 1, it has to go off in Act 3, and
right.
the production person comes back and says, I didn't see the gun on the wall, and then all of a sudden it's like going off, and everyone else is like, it's a fucking cannon, it's right there on stage. Like, how the fuck did you not see it? Oh, the cannon. I was looking for a gun on the wall. Cannon. Well, who's supposed to? Who expected that there? It was where the cats were supposed to fucking be. Who do you So I wonder if that's not the rationale behind it. But I don't know. I'm speculating.
I think there's also the fact that it gave one of the few opportunities for nudity in the episode, and that there is a certain sense to which I think that's also a product note that comes down on high.
Sex position, yes, we need more of it. If there's not some more, and I mean the one clever thing about it is he is sort of directing, and so it is one of those moments where the auteur inserts him or herself into the film, because he's directing the sex scene, right?
Yeah.
As he's narrating his evil schemes, he's also, I mean, it's the equivalent of the Austin Powers moment where he's both telling you about the sharks with lasers and telling the sharks with lasers what to do.
Right.
And you really don't need to point out that they're sharks with frickin' laser beams. And it's actually funny only because he feels the necessity to continue to point it out.
Right.
Whereas this is it just goes on too long.
Yeah.
Much like our conversation.
I don't have anything to say about the next John scene. It's kind of an invented scene, and there's not really much happens. So should we move on to the scene with Eddard and Robert being mortally wounded, and then the writing of the will and the different offers? So some things to sort of say about this is that, people for some reason have seemed to accept or adopt Cersei's argument about bits of paper. And the reality is that if you look at history, wills can be incredibly vital. That's how Augustus becomes Augustus. But it depends on the question of military hegemony, which is even as long as there isn't total hegemony on Cersei's side, that will can be incredibly vital. It's really only because the gold cloaks have gone over that it becomes irrelevant. Because her ripping up that will is an act of treason, legally speaking. And she passed it. She probably would have been found guilty. But it's the fact that she has the army that means she won't get arrested.
And the fact that she has the army literally in the room with her. I mean, I think it's crucial that everything is on location. And all of those shots of her talking, and of Joffrey, they're all framed. Both her and Joffrey are constantly framed by the gold cloaks. Like, so we'll see what's essentially a crotch, Joffrey's head, and a crotch behind it, or shoulders, Cersei, and another pair of shoulders. I mean, it's not very subtle with the idea that whatever legal system was in place and accorded some sort of respect prior to Robert's birth has now been totally superseded by brute force.
Right. And I also wanted to talk about the different offers because they've changed from the book. In the book, Renly offers 100 swords to Ned, but he doesn't say, make me king, which is kind of an interesting difference. And the other sort of intervention I want to make in the literature, so to speak, is to point out that at this point, war is inevitable. It really doesn't matter what Eddard does, because, regardless of what Littlefinger and what Renly are proposing, Stannis already knows about all of this. That's why he left King's Landing.
Yeah.
He's building an army. He's going to go to war no matter what. Balon Greyjoy is going to go to war the moment that there's any, uncertainty. Tywin Lannister is in the field with an army. And even if you captured Cersei and Joffrey, you see how he reacts when Lannisters get captured.
Yeah.
He reacts with all-out war. So, in a sense, I think people are blaming Ned for something that was totally beyond his power. The one nice change that I think they've made is that the letter that he sends to Stannis actually makes it out in the show. In the book, it doesn't. That letter is stopped by Cersei. So it gives him a minor victory.
Very minor.
So that a very minor victory, but potentially enormously consequential. I mean, if you think about it, if Stannis had shown that letter to Catelyn when the two of them meet in season 2, right? Potentially that could change the course of the war. If the Starks know that Eddard had proclaimed him king, I think that would change very much what their behavior would be. So it is something potentially consequential.
The one thing I'll say about the way that scene is actually set up physically is because this is there's a series of shots of Ned Stark and there are no medium or medium close-ups. They're all either long shots, so you can see him leaning on his cane and him saying, "I'm the defender of the crowd of the crown," and everyone showing us that the defender of the crown is a cripple. Which seems contradictory. And then we have a series of scenes in which there are shots in which getting noisy on your end.
Yes, this is New York, so we just get occasional fire alarms.
Ah, okay.
Or
burn that city down. No, don't do that.
We'll pass in a second.
But some of the podcast is so much more dramatic. There's the interplay between those long shots and the very dramatic close-ups. The close-ups are meant to bring us right up to Ned's face and actually let us see the pain in his eyes and the realization that he's lost. And that was one of the things I used to love to argue about in class with my students. On which of these reverse shots to Ned does the director want to indicate that he's realized he's lost? Because they keep going back and forth and back and forth. And the consensus usually is it's that third one, because whereas his face had been all tense and taut, all of a sudden he cuts back to him and he's like, and he's sort of
what's happening at the time of the third reverse?
The third reverse is, I'm trying to remember now. I will note it in the post accompanying, because I don't.
Okay, I'm just curious.
I remember which one it was, but not exactly what preceded it. I should.
All right. So, So the only thing that I'll say about the bit in the throne room is that, especially from the books, there's an incredible risk having this many important people in a room with swords. Right? All you need is one Stark guard to get within sword's length of Cersei and Joffrey, and like potentially this all goes wrong, even if you have 100 to 1. So one of the things I kind of want to point to is just that these are it reminds me a lot of scenes in like crime dramas in which like there's a Mexican standoff and everyone's got guns pointed at each other. It's like anything could go wrong at this moment.
Mexican standoff, only 2 people.
Well, think about Reservoir Dogs.
But that's a thing that Quentin Tarantino came up with based on but traditionally Mexican.
And bad and the ugly is people.
Yeah. But I do see what you're saying that you don't normally want this many, and of course, as we see at the end of season 3, right? The consequences of having this many important people in the same room at the same time can oftentimes be quite devastating. Right? The Red Wedding doesn't happen if everyone doesn't show up.
Well, and why it's consequential that the Blackfish stepped out to take a leak.
Yeah. That might come back to bite them. Who knows?
Yeah.
All right.
So, should we talk briefly about the Dany assassination attempt?
Yeah, because for one, it's the only real time we're getting interplay between the two continents.
Yeah.
First season.
Yeah, there's that, and it's also I hope it's clear to people how staged this is.
And how long it takes her to catch on.
Yeah, there is someone who, if he wants you dead, he hires some incompetent wine seller who can't act his way out of a paper bag to deliver the poison. If he wants you dead, you will die. I want to give props to Jason Momoa for doing a really good WW promo.
Yeah. I think that goes.
Completely made up language.
Yeah, I think that sort of goes for the whole series. His whole presence on the series. He just a lot of flexing, just pointlessly.
Yeah.
It's hard sitting in this chair. I have to use every muscle in my very large chest to prop myself up. Right?
Well, I think it's also, as we'll talk about in the next episode, Drogo doesn't do a whole lot in the first book. He's this great warrior, but in terms of things he actually accomplishes, there's not much. So you have to kind of lend that role some dynamism just through your physical presence.
Yeah, but
I think that's what the flexing does.
It doesn't need to get to the point whereas if I were to draw laser beams out of his nipples, in some scenes they're going this way, some scenes they're going that way. They're caught on because he's always flexing, and so now someone's going to request I do a scene of laser beams coming out. I'm not going to do a scene of laser beams coming out the man's nipples. That's just wrong. But
okay.
But yeah,
I did want to talk.
Go on.
Yeah, I did want to talk briefly about the scene where Jon finds out about being made a steward rather than a injure. It's just kind of an interesting clash between the theory of George Mormont that the Watch is an egalitarian institution in which you arrive at the Watch from every every station in life, and that you become equal brothers. And the reality that Jon considers himself too good to be a steward, but at the same time is being made a steward because, as a nobleman, he is being groomed for command. Whereas, Pip and Gren are most definitely not being groomed for command.
No, and the other thing, the other part of it is he does want to go out looking for his uncle. And he knows that that's not going to be possible as a steward. And so his disappointment is not solely, and also because, every training montage they've had, clearly he has been the most able with a sword, with the shield. So his disappointment is palpable. It's one of the few moments where he almost seems a little whiny, which for the most part
Jon Snow being whiny? I'm shocked.
most of the time he's anyway.
Oh man, I can't wait until we get into
across the
season
audio
2.
version. You'd have to have seen our faces, but yeah, I think it's another way of looking at that scene is it's clearly one in which John is being put in his place, or at least being told you don't get to dictate what your place is.
A little bit of his privilege, that Pitt points out that hey, a lot of us didn't choose to go here at all. And then I love Sam's bit about I wanted to be a wizard. It's like, yeah, you don't always get what you want. The whole Disney when you wish upon a star thing, that's just in the movies. That's not how it actually works.
All right, so I think that about covers it for this episode. I don't want to run over again.
All right, cool.
So, this has been another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. I'm Scott R. Kaufman, Stephen Attewell, and we will see you later.
See that one?